"What's a man like you doing here? You look more like the staff than the guest list." The words didn't come quiet. They cut through the ballroom like a whip. Nathan Whitmore's smirk widened as champagne shimmered in his glass. The laughter that followed wasn't warm. It was sharp, practiced, meant to wound. A ripple of chuckles rolled across the room, bouncing off crystal chandeliers and marble floors polished to a cruel shine. Phones tilted upward. Some guests grinned, ready to capture the spectacle. Humiliation was entertainment in rooms like this. But the man at the center didn't move. David Cole. Tall, composed, his tuxedo cut with precision but absent of vanity, no golden logos, no jeweled cufflinks screaming for attention. At his wrist, a single vintage timepiece, elegant, understated, almost rebellious against the glittering parade around him. His skin glowed bronze under the chandeliers, his shoulders squared in quiet defiance. His smile was slight, unreadable, but his eyes were alive, sharp, patient, already measuring the room. He folded his arms, not as defense but as declaration. Calm, grounded, a presence that didn't beg to be seen, but made it impossible to look away. Victoria Whitmore leaned into her son, her voice honeyed but dripping with venom. "Darling, perhaps the catering staff wandered into the ballroom. Should we send him back to the kitchen?" More laughter, the kind that pretended to be polite but landed like stones. From the far corner, Isabella Whitmore raised her phone, live streaming to thousands of followers. Her tone sweet, her words sharp. "Even our parties attract gatecrashers now. Look at this." David didn't flinch. He had seen this play before. At 16, standing in a Charlotte hotel lobby in his best shirt, told to leave because this area is for real guests. That night, he'd slept in a car, dignity intact but heart heavy. And in that cold silence, he made a vow. One day, I won't be the guest. I'll be the owner. Now here he was, mocked in front of marble and money, and he let it happen. Every insult was tinder piled higher, waiting for the spark. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to David. The ballroom hummed with tension. Guests whispered behind crystal rims, some with discomfort, others with delight. A young banker near the back, face pale, raised his phone discreetly, red light blinking. The Whitmores, however, weren't done. Nathan stepped closer, voice sharper. "Next time, dress the part. You can't buy your way into class." Then, in one cruel motion, he snatched the glass of champagne from David's hand and smashed it onto the marble. The shatter rang out like a gavel, shards scattering like broken crowns at David's feet. Gasps rippled. Not horror, anticipation. Every camera was rolling now. The Whitmores believed they had staged their victory. The outsider mocked, the family triumphant, the room complicit. But David Cole wasn't written into their story. He was writing his own. He looked down at the shattered glass, then raised his head slowly. His gaze locked on Nathan's, steady, unshaken. He stood as if anchored to the marble itself. The storm had chosen its stage, and David Cole had just decided he wasn't leaving it. The ballroom didn't breathe. It waited. Crystal chandeliers glittered above like watchful eyes, and every guest seemed frozen between sip and silence. The shards of champagne glass still glimmered at David's feet, a crown of broken crystal laid before a man the Whitmores had mistaken for a servant. Charles Whitmore stepped forward then, patriarch of the dynasty, his white tuxedo glowing under the light as if the room had been built to frame him. His voice was slow, heavy with condescension, meant for every ear in the room. "This is a private gathering, for real families of wealth. Some people simply don't belong." A soft murmur rippled through the guests. Some smiled nervously, others looked down into their glasses, unwilling to intervene but eager to witness. The unspoken agreement of the powerful: cruelty was entertainment, as long as it wasn't pointed at you. David didn't answer. He stood where he was, one hand resting against his chest, the other loose at his side. His eyes drifted across the room, taking in faces lit by the glow of chandeliers and the shimmer of privilege. He knew this look, this tone, this theater. He had lived it before. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't here by accident. From the corner, Isabella Whitmore's voice floated in, sugary and sharp. She was still streaming. Her phone angled just right to capture the scene, her commentary soft enough to sound casual but loud enough to wound. "He doesn't even look like he can afford the valet." Daddy's right, some doors should stay closed. Her followers erupted in comments, hearts, and laughing emojis scrolling across her screen. The ballroom was no longer just an audience, it was a stage broadcast live to thousands. The Whitmores weren't humiliating a man. They were curating content. David's gaze flicked once toward her, calm and steady, before returning to Charles. No reaction, no retreat. His silence pressed against the walls harder than words ever could. Victoria Whitmore, radiant in her diamond-studded gown, took a deliberate step closer. Her smile was the kind that belonged to society pages, perfect for photographs, poisonous in truth. "Darling, you're blocking the view. Why don't you do us all a favor and step outside? The staff corridor is just to the left." Laughter again. This time sharper, more confident, as if her approval had given permission. A ripple of applause even followed from one corner, hollow and cruel. Still, David said nothing. He let the sound crash over him, unbroken, anchored. Near the back, a younger guest shifted uncomfortably. A banker, barely in his 30s, phone clutched nervously in his hand. His finger hovered over record. Then, with a slow breath, he tapped. The red light blinked alive. The ballroom's cruelty was now evidence. Nathan noticed, his smirk twisting. He stepped closer, circling David like a predator sizing prey. "Tell me, friend," he said loudly, voice carrying across the marble. "Who invited you here? Which door did you slip through? Or maybe you're just hoping to brush shoulders with people who matter." He leaned in, his breath thick with champagne. News flash, money doesn't buy class. "Oh," gasps and chuckles echoed. Guests weren't sure whether to laugh or recoil, but Nathan's arrogance filled the silence before they could choose. David's expression never shifted. He stood still, shoulders squared, the light catching the calm set of his jaw. His silence was not weakness, it was gravity, and slowly, the weight of it bent the air. But the Whitmores didn't see it. Not yet. They mistook stillness for surrender. They mistook patience for defeat. Charles raised his glass, dismissive, his voice firm. "Security." From the corner, two men in black suits began moving. Their steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing across marble like a countdown. Guests whispered, some with excitement, some with unease. Phones lifted higher. The banker filming swallowed hard. His voice, small but audible, broke the silence. "He's not staff, he's a guest. I saw his name on the list." Heads turned. Isabella's stream caught it, her audience commenting furiously. Charles shot the man a glare cold enough to silence him, but the crack had opened. Doubt had entered the room. Victoria's voice sliced through it, smooth and deadly. "Lists can be forged. Appearances, however, appearances never lie." Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she lifted her glass, smiling as if she'd just delivered a toast. Laughter followed again, obedient. David remained silent. His eyes lowered briefly to the shards of glass at his feet, then lifted back to the Whitmores. His posture didn't shift, his calm didn't waver, but the room began to feel it. A storm wasn't avoided by silence. Sometimes, silence was the storm. The security guards drew closer. The music had stopped without anyone noticing. The chandeliers glittered harder, crueler, as if the very light was complicit. The Whitmores believed the script was theirs. But David Cole was already writing a different ending. The ballroom's music had died, but no one noticed when. The only rhythm now was the echo of shoes across marble as two security guards approached, their dark suits splitting the crowd. Every step carried weight, each one a reminder of where power seemed to rest in the hands of those who had always claimed it. Nathan Whitmore tilted his head, amused, savoring the performance like a ringmaster in his circus. "See? Even the room knows you don't belong." The laughter that followed was no longer nervous. It was confident, collective. Guests clinked glasses, emboldened by the Whitmore family's arrogance, by the belief that wealth could define worth. David Cole stood unmoving. His hands rested calmly at his sides now, his chest rising slow, measured. To most, it looked like resignation. But the silence pressed heavier with every second. He remembered. 16 years old, standing in the lobby of a Charlotte hotel, dressed in his best shirt, the one his mother had ironed twice. He had saved for weeks to book a single night, a birthday gift to himself, a glimpse of the world he dreamed of entering. But the concierge had looked at him, then past him, then back with narrowed eyes. "Sir, this lobby is for guests only." "I am a guest." "Not tonight." He remembered the way people stared as he was escorted out. the weight of their judgment heavier than the hand on his shoulder. He had sat in the parking lot for hours, the hotel glowing gold behind him, while he shivered inside an old car. He promised himself then, "One day, I won't be turned away. I'll be the one who decides who stays." The vow burned still, even here, decades later. Back in the ballroom, the security guards were close now, only steps away. Guests leaned in, hungry for the spectacle of removal, the small thrill of watching someone erased in real time. Isabella's phone caught every angle, hearts and laughing emojis pouring across her live stream. "Thousands are watching right now," she whispered to a friend, smiling as if she had orchestrated it herself. Charles Whitmore raised his glass again, his voice commanding the room like a conductor. "This is a celebration of legacy, legacy built on tradition, on family, on real power. Not pretenders." He let the word hang, dripping disdain, and guests nodded, murmuring agreement. Some glanced at David with open pity, others with smug delight. Victoria stepped forward, her diamonds catching the chandelier's glow. "This evening is not for everyone, especially not for men who confuse ambition with belonging." Her tone was silk over steel. Applause broke out from a cluster of guests nearby, sharp and orchestrated, feeding the Whitmore's cruelty. Still, David did not move. His silence was not submission, it was calculation. His eyes scanned the room, not desperate but deliberate, as though each face was being recorded, each insult stored. The banker near the back, phone still raised, shifted uneasily. His voice broke out again, louder this time, trembling but firm. "He is on the list. I saw his name. David Cole. He belongs here." Heads turned. Some guests blinked, confused, whispers breaking through the hum of arrogance. Isabella's live stream caught every syllable, her comments now split between laughter and doubt. Nathan sneered, stepping closer, his voice dripping contempt. "David Cole? Never heard of him. Probably some hustler trying to claw his way in." The words stung the air like sparks. Gasps followed, some entertained, others uneasy. For the first time, doubt rippled not just among the guests, but within the Whitmores themselves. David's eyes locked on Nathan, calm, steady. He didn't need to shout. His silence carried further than any insult could. The security guards paused, uncertain now. The room wasn't as unified as before. The tide had shifted slightly, imperceptibly, but enough to unsettle. Victoria tried to seize control, her voice sharp as crystal breaking. "Some people mistake silence for presence, but silence is emptiness, and emptiness does not belong among power." Her words floated above the crowd, but for the first time, they didn't land clean. Whispers of dissent threaded through the room. The banker's courage had cracked the veneer. David exhaled slowly, a breath no one could hear, but one that carried decades of endurance. His stillness wasn't emptiness. It was weight, and the ballroom was beginning to feel it. The storm had not yet broken, but the clouds were gathering fast. The air in the ballroom had shifted. It wasn't laughter now, it was anticipation, sharp and electric, the way a crowd leans forward before the final blow. The security guards had stopped just short of David, their hesitation visible in the flicker of their eyes. The banker's voice, trembling but insistent, had planted a seed of doubt, and now silence stretched thin across marble and glass. But the Whitmores weren't finished. Nathan, emboldened by the crowd, leaned in close, his breath thick with champagne, his smirk sharpened into cruelty. "You're standing here like you belong, but let's be honest, you don't. This room was built for legacies, families who matter. You're just a shadow looking for light." He lifted his hand, and before anyone could react, he plucked the name card from the table beside David, the card embossed in gold, resting in front of an empty seat reserved for him. Nathan held it up, turning it toward the crowd with a mocking grin. "David Cole," he read aloud, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Sounds important, doesn't it? Except, I could print one of these on my home printer tonight." A bit. The room erupted in laughter. Guests leaned closer, delighted at the spectacle. Isabella zoomed her camera in, streaming every second, her audience exploding with comments. "Fake. He doesn't belong. Throw him out." Nathan crumpled the card slowly, theatrically, letting the sound of the paper tearing echo across the room. Then he tossed the shredded pieces onto the floor at David's feet. "There. That's where you belong." Gasps rippled, not all from delight this time. Some faces tightened, uneasy. The cruelty had tipped into something darker, more vicious. Charles Whitmore stepped forward, voice booming like a judge delivering sentence. Enough of this charade. Escort him out now. The security guards moved again, more decisively this time, their hesitation drowned by the patriarch's command. Shoes struck marble, firm, final. David did not move. He didn't flinch, didn't lower his gaze. He stood anchored, the storm gathering behind his eyes. His silence was no longer a shield. It was a blade unsheathed. He remembered another moment, 25 years old, standing outside an office tower in Chicago, a building he'd applied to work in, a job interview he'd prepared for with everything he had. The receptionist had glanced at his resume, then at his face, and told him flatly the position had been filled. He learned later it hadn't been. They had simply decided he didn't fit the culture. Out. He remembered walking away that day with nothing but anger and resolve, and he remembered whispering to himself, if I can't fit into their culture, I'll build my own. The vow lived still, carried in every step, every deal, every empire he had built since. And tonight, in this room, it burned brighter than ever. The banker's voice rose again, louder this time, breaking through the tension. Stop this. He is who he says he is. I saw it. He's a guest. His name was on the list. You can't erase him just because you don't like the way he looks. Murmurs surged. A woman near the front lowered her phone, biting her lip. A man in a gray tuxedo shifted uncomfortably, his glass trembling in his hand. The crowd was no longer united. Doubt had carved a line through their arrogance. Victoria's smile hardened, her voice slicing the air like ice. Perception is reality, and right now, everyone here sees the truth. He doesn't belong. Oh. But even as she spoke, the room betrayed her. Whispers of dissent grew louder. Eyes darted toward David, not with derision but with unease. The cruelty had stretched too far, and something in the air was turning. The guards were only a step away now. Their hands twitched, uncertain, as if they could feel the weight of history pressing against their shoulders. David Cole exhaled once, slow and steady. His gaze swept across the room, the chandeliers, the marble, the diamonds, the faces both cruel and uncertain. He had endured this theater before. But tonight, he wasn't the same man who had been turned away at 16 or dismissed at 25. Tonight, he wasn't the guest. He was the storm, and the storm was about to break. The ballroom held its breath. The guards were close enough to touch him now, their shadows stretching long across the marble floor. The laughter had quieted, replaced by murmurs, some sharp with scorn, others uncertain. The Whitmores thought they had won. They thought the night was sealed, another chapter of humiliation written in their ledger of privilege. But David Cole wasn't finished. He let the silence linger, stretching until the air itself felt brittle. Then, slowly, he slipped a hand into his pocket. For a moment, the crowd leaned forward, expecting surrender, perhaps an ID card, perhaps a meek explanation. Instead, David drew out a phone. Sleek, black, silent. His thumb moved once, deliberate, precise. The screen lit his face with a faint glow. He pressed a single button. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Calm, measured, the kind of tone that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Activate acquisition protocol. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed like thunder disguised as a whisper. On the other end, a voice answered instantly, firm and professional. Understood, sir. The deal is ready. All contracts signed. Just give the word. Some guests blinked, confused. Others frowned, uncertain. The Whitmores laughed, brittle and mocking. Nathan's grin widened. Acquisition protocol? He jeered. What are you, some kind of spy? Making calls to impress us? That's cute. But his laughter rang hollow. A ripple of unease had threaded through the room. The banker filming tightened his grip on his phone. His eyes darted from David to the Whitmores, his lips parting as if to speak, but he stayed silent. He knew something was shifting. Charles Whitmore barked, his voice heavy with authority, desperate to smother the moment. This charade ends now. Security, remove him. The guards hesitated. Their eyes flicked toward David, then toward Charles. The command hung in the air, heavy but unanswered. David lifted his gaze, calm and unshaken. He didn't look at Charles. He looked at the entire room, the chandeliers, the sequins, the faces caught between cruelty and doubt. His silence carried weight, and now, with the phone still in his hand, it carried power. Victoria's voice sliced in, sharp and dismissive. Playing games with phones won't change reality. You don't belong in this room, not now, not ever. But even as she spoke, The sound of another phone buzzed from across the room, then another. A series of vibrations, tones, alerts, one after another, like dominoes falling. Guests began pulling out their devices, eyes widening as notifications appeared. Contracts announced. News bulletins updated. Emails flagged urgent. Cole Global Capital. Acquisition confirmed. Whitmore Enterprises majority shares transferred. The ballroom trembled, not from noise but from realization. David slipped his phone back into his pocket, movements unhurried, deliberate. He didn't need to explain. The room was already reading the truth in their own hands. Isabella's live stream caught the first wave of panic, her camera shaking as she gasped, comments exploding across the screen. He owns them. Wait, is this real? Check the news, it's everywhere. Nathan's smirk faltered, his face pale beneath the golden light. He glanced at his father, but Charles's expression had hardened into something worse than anger, fear. Still, David said nothing. His silence thundered louder than their voices ever had. The banker lowered his phone slowly, whispering to himself. He wasn't bluffing. Victoria tried to speak, but her words caught in her throat. Her diamond smile cracked, the facade slipping in front of the very audience she had tried to command. The guards froze, their steps halted completely. They weren't escorting anyone out now. The hierarchy had shifted. David Cole stood where he had always stood, calm, composed, unshaken. But the room around him had changed. The Whitmores were no longer hosts. They were exposed, vulnerable, defenseless. And David had only spoken 6 words. Activate acquisition protocol. The deal is ready. The storm was no longer approaching. It had begun. The ballroom had gone still, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Phones buzzed in hands, screens flashing with alerts that no one wanted to believe. Words rippled from guest to guest in urgent whispers. Cole Global Capital, acquisition, majority control. For the first time, the laughter was gone. Nathan's smirk faltered into confusion, his glass trembling slightly. He looked around as though searching for an ally, but the crowd that had cheered his cruelty moments earlier now avoided his eyes. Their faces weren't amused anymore. They were pale, wide-eyed, waiting. David Cole finally spoke. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It rolled across the marble floor, steady and precise, each syllable cutting sharper than glass. You mocked the wrong man tonight. Silence followed, heavy as stone. Guests leaned in, hungry for clarity, their disbelief warring with the truth vibrating in their pockets. David's eyes fixed on Charles Whitmore, unblinking. I am David Cole, founder and CEO of Cole Global Capital. The name you crumpled, the seat you tried to erase, those weren't forged. They were reserved. He let the words settle, the weight of them pressing against every corner of the ballroom. And as of midnight tonight, Cole Global Capital holds controlling shares of Whitmore Enterprises. Gasps erupted like thunder. Phones shot higher into the air, flashes igniting. Isabella's live stream caught the exact moment her father's empire collapsed. The comments on her screen turned savage. He owns you. The party is his now. Legacy? Over. Charles's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time all evening, the patriarch had no script. Victoria staggered back a step, diamonds trembling against her wrist. Her practiced smile, the one she had worn through decades of galas, shattered under the weight of truth. Nathan shook his head furiously, desperate to salvage control. This is a stunt. A trick. David cut him off, his tone calm but final. Check the markets. Nathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands, eyes darting across the screen. The color drained from his face as he read. Shares, transfers, announcements. His words died in his throat. The crowd erupted in whispers. Some guests looked at David with awe, others with shame, many with sudden admiration. The power they had worshipped minutes ago now belonged to him. David stepped forward, past the shards of broken glass, past the crumpled name card at his feet. His presence filled the room now, not as an outsider, but as the center of gravity. You thought silence was weakness, he said, his gaze sweeping across the family that had mocked him. But silence is patience. Patience to watch an empire crumble the moment truth is revealed. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed like verdicts, one after another, until the ballroom itself seemed to bow beneath them. The banker who had defended him earlier lowered his phone, a small smile breaking across his face. Around him, other guests began nodding, murmuring approval. The tide had turned fully. Victoria whispered, her voice trembling now. "What do you want from us?" David turned his gaze on her, calm and unshaken. "Nothing you can give. The question is, what will you do without what I've taken?" Gasps again, louder this time. Guests looked at one another, the thrill of justice igniting in their eyes. David Cole didn't smile. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. The Whitmores had mocked him in front of their world. Now, before that same world, he had stripped them of their power. The storm had broken, and David Cole was its center. The ballroom was no longer white with laughter. It was white with shock. Chandeliers still blazed above, but the light felt harsher now, exposing every crack in the Whitmores' carefully polished facade. Nathan stumbled back a step, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble. The sound echoed like a cruel reminder of the glass he had shattered earlier. Only this time, it wasn't David standing over the shards. It was him. Victoria's fingers clutched at her necklace, the diamonds that once commanded attention now trembling against her skin. Her practiced smile was gone, replaced with a flicker of fear. She scanned the crowd, searching for allies, but found only silence, silence heavy with judgment. Charles tried to regain control, his voice, once booming, now cracked with desperation. "You can't just, this is impossible, our lawyers are bored." David raised a hand, calm, steady, silencing him without effort. "You're bored?" His tone was even, unhurried. "As of tonight, your board reports to me." Ebly. The words detonated in the room. Guests gasped, phones shot higher into the air. Isabella's livestream trembled as her hand shook, comments flooding. "He owns them. Board gone. Empire fallen." Charles staggered, the weight of truth pressing down on him. For decades, he had spoken as though his word was law. Now, in one sentence, his reign had ended. Nathan lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger. "You don't get to humiliate us like this. You think you can walk in here, take everything, and—" David's gaze locked on him, calm but razor sharp. "Take everything?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a quiet blade. "I didn't take anything. You gave it away. With arrogance, with entitlement, with the belief that no one could ever challenge you. You mocked a man who already owned your name." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some nodding, some whispering in awe. The banker who had defended David earlier lifted his phone again, recording every word. His voice whispered into the mic, "This is history." Victoria's voice broke through, brittle as glass underfoot. "This is our home, our family's legacy. You can't erase it." David turned his eyes on her, steady, unyielding. "Legacy isn't built in marble halls or crystal chandeliers. Legacy is built in how you treat others. And tonight, your legacy crumbled before your guests, not because of me, but because of you." Her face paled, the truth cutting sharper than any insult. Isabella's stream caught the crowd's shift. Guests who had once laughed now stood in uneasy silence, some with admiration dawning in their eyes. One older woman whispered to her husband, "He carries himself like a king." David let the silence hang. Then he turned to the guards, who still hovered uncertain, waiting for orders that no longer belonged to the Whitmores. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Escort the Whitmore family out." Gasps shot through the room. Heads whipped toward Charles, toward Nathan, toward Victoria. For the first time in their lives, they were the ones standing on trial before their peers. The guards hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward. Their deference had shifted. They no longer answered to the Whitmores. They answered to the man who now held power. Nathan's voice cracked as he backed away. "This is insane. We are the Whitmores. You can't do this." David's eyes didn't waver. "Power isn't in your name. It's in the choices you make. And tonight, your choices ended your reign." The ballroom buzzed louder now, guests whispering furiously, phones flashing, streams exploding online. Justice was unfolding in real time, and the world was watching. Victoria clutched Charles's arm, her voice trembling. "Please, not in front of everyone." David's reply was steady, final. "Respect isn't requested. It's earned. You chose humiliation. Tonight, you wear it." The guards closed in. Guests stepped aside, clearing a path. The family that had once owned the room now walked it like prisoners of their own arrogance. The marble floor that had carried their triumphs now echoed with their defeat. David Cole remained where he was, calm, unshaken, the chandeliers above reflecting in his steady gaze. The Whitmores had mocked him. Now they were being escorted out of their own empire. And the night was far from over. The marble floor echoed with footsteps, slow and uneven. The Whitmore family, once the embodiment of untouchable wealth, now walked between security guards, their diamonds dim, their names heavier than chains. Nathan's protests had turned into whispers, Victoria's pleas into silence, Charles's authority into nothing more than a trembling hand gripping his cane. Phones followed their retreat like spotlights. Isabella's live stream, once a weapon of mockery, now captured the family's fall in real time. Comments flooded the screen. Karma. The empire is his. Witnessing history. The ballroom parted, a sea of gowns and tuxedos opening a path not with reverence, but with judgment. Guests who once laughed now whispered, some shaking their heads, others recording every second. The Whitmores exited not as hosts, but as cautionary tales. And when the heavy doors closed behind them, silence settled like a crown on David's shoulders. All eyes turned to him. He did not step onto a stage. He didn't need to. Standing beneath the chandeliers, with shards of glass still at his feet, he commanded the room effortlessly. His silence had carried the night. Now his words would seal it. David lifted his gaze, calm, unshaken, his voice steady but resonant. Power isn't how loud you laugh at others. Power isn't how you make someone small in front of a crowd. Power is what survives after the laughter dies. The words rolled across the room, sinking deep into marble and memory. Guests held their breath, not daring to interrupt. He continued, eyes sweeping across the assembly. Tonight you saw a family mistake cruelty for strength. They believed their name would shield them forever. But a name without respect is just ink on paper, and paper burns easily. A ripple of murmurs surged, guests nodding, some clapping softly before stopping, as though afraid to break the gravity of the moment. David stepped forward, his shoes crunching against the broken glass Nathan had smashed earlier. He didn't look down, he looked ahead, his voice sharpening into steel. When I was 16, I was told to leave a hotel lobby because I didn't belong. When I was 25, I was told I didn't fit the culture. And tonight, I was told again that I didn't belong in this room. But understand this, belonging isn't given, it's claimed. And I claimed mine long before I walked through these doors. The room stirred. A few guests began clapping, quietly at first, then louder, joined by others until the sound spread. Applause grew, filling the ballroom, rolling like thunder beneath the chandeliers. David raised a hand gently, and the clapping softened into silence again. His final words came low, deliberate, unforgettable. I don't raise my voice. I don't need to, because when justice speaks, the world listens. The silence that followed was not empty. It was reverent. It was the silence of recognition, of respect earned not through arrogance, but through truth. Then the applause erupted again, louder this time, a standing ovation that shook the marble floor. Glasses clinked, not in mockery, but in salute. The same crowd that had once laughed now stood in awe, their eyes fixed on the man who had turned humiliation into history. David Cole didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply stood beneath the chandeliers, the storm now quiet around him, his presence undeniable. The Whitmores were gone. The night was his. And for the first time in that ballroom's long, cruel history, justice had been served in real time. The applause thundered on, rolling across the ballroom like a wave breaking against marble. Guests who had moments ago smirked or turned away now stood tall, clapping with conviction, their voices carrying a new kind of energy. For the first time all evening, the room was united not in cruelty, but in respect. Phones stayed high, flashes bursting, live streams surging with comments. Isabella's feed had gone viral within minutes. Her trembling hand still held the camera, though her face had gone pale. The mockery she intended to broadcast had transformed into a global spectacle of reckoning. Comments scrolled endlessly. He flipped the script. Justice served. The calmest man in the room just ended their empire. David Cole stood where he had always stood, motionless, composed. He hadn't moved toward the ovation, hadn't raised a hand to claim the praise. The applause wasn't his goal. The silence that followed humiliation, that was his arena. One guest, a senator with silver hair, leaned toward his wife. That man doesn't just walk into rooms, he redefines them. She nodded, eyes never leaving David. Others began to move closer. The young banker who had defended David earlier approached, his voice reverent. Mr. Cole, it's an honor. Tonight, you didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us who've ever been told we don't belong. David's gaze softened for the first time, though his expression remained steady. He gave a small nod, nothing more, Yet the young man's face lit with pride, as though he'd been knighted. Around the ballroom, whispers grew louder, shifting from awe to speculation. If he owns Whitmore Enterprises, what else does he control? Did you see how he handled them? Unshaken. This is the man everyone will want to work with now. David did not interrupt. He let the whispers rise. He knew the power of silence. He had wielded it all night. At the back of the room, Isabella lowered her phone at last. Her screen continued to buzz with thousands of notifications, her followers dissecting every word, every gesture, every look. She had meant to humiliate him, but instead she had immortalized him. The video was already trending worldwide. The fall of the Whitmores was no longer private shame, it was public record. Victoria's diamonds, Nathan's arrogance, Charles's booming authority, all reduced to broken images in a feed watched by millions. One guest whispered to another, "By morning, this will be everywhere, every news outlet, every feed." And they were right. Justice wasn't confined to the ballroom anymore. It had gone global. David finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, even after the storm. "Remember this night not for me. Remember it for what it showed you. That dignity doesn't bow. That respect cannot be bought. And that arrogance always costs more than it earns." The words landed like stone in water, rippling outward. The applause returned, stronger, louder, echoing under the chandeliers until the very walls seemed to vibrate. David did not smile. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried more than triumph. It carried inevitability. As the ovation roared on, he turned slightly, his eyes drifting toward the doors where the Whitmores had been let out. There was no gloating in his gaze, no mockery, only finality. Their reign had ended not with a shout, but with a whisper, his whisper. The guests erupted again, glasses lifted not in arrogance but in salute. The night was no longer theirs. It was his. David Cole had entered as a man mocked. He now stood as the man who had rewritten the room. The ovation still shook the chandeliers when the first headlines broke across glowing phone screens. Guests raised their devices, eyes widening as they read the news in real time. Cole Global Capital takes control of Whitmore Empire. Black CEO redefines power at elite gala. Legacy family humiliated live on stream. The ballroom buzzed louder, the sound shifting from applause to astonished chatter. This was no longer a private spectacle. It was a global event unfolding in seconds, each guest both witness and messenger. Isabella's livestream had crossed 1 million viewers. Comments raced down her screen faster than she could read. Some mocked the Whitmores, others praised David, many simply marveled. "I can't believe this happened live. The calmest man in the room just ended an empire." Isabella lowered her phone slowly, the reality sinking in. What she had meant to use as a dagger had become a crown for David Cole. She closed the stream, but it was too late. The video had already been clipped, shared, replicated. It would outlive the night and outlive her family's name. Guests began to gather their coats, their jewels, their phones still glowing with headlines, yet none of them left in haste. They lingered, drawn to the gravity of what had unfolded. Some approached David quietly, offering nods, handshakes, words of respect. A diplomat murmured, "Mr. Cole, the world will remember tonight." A business magnate whispered, "Call me. We should talk." Ugh. A young woman, no more than 20, clasped her hands and said, "Thank you for showing us dignity can win." David acknowledged each with the same measured grace, a nod, a steady glance, a soft word. He never raised his voice, never shifted his calm. The room that had tried to erase him now orbited him, drawn by the quiet force of respect. The banker who had defended him earlier approached one last time, his voice hushed. "You didn't just change this room, you changed the story. For all of us." David's reply was simple, almost a whisper. The story was always ours, they just forgot. As the crowd slowly thinned, the atmosphere transformed. Where there had once been laughter edged with cruelty, there was now reverence, almost solemnity. Guests walked toward the doors as if leaving a temple, each carrying the weight of what they had seen. The marble floor still bore shards of glass, the remnants of Nathan's arrogance. But now, they glittered differently, reflecting not humiliation, but transformation. David took one final look at the ballroom. He did not smile. He didn't need to. The night had already been written in silence and steel. He turned, his tuxedo catching the chandelier's glow, and began to walk toward the doors. Cameras followed him, phones raised high, but no one dared shout his name. The room gave him something greater than applause. It gave him silence, the silence of recognition, of respect that could not be bought. The heavy doors opened. Cold night air drifted in, crisp against the heat of the ballroom. David stepped through without looking back. Behind him, the guests continued to whisper, headlines continued to spread, and the video continued to burn across the internet. By morning, the world would know the name David Cole, not because he shouted it, but because he carried it with dignity. The Whitmores had tried to humiliate him. Instead, they had immortalized him. And as he disappeared into the night, the echo of the ovation still lingered in the marble hall, a reminder that justice doesn't need noise, it needs presence. David Cole had given them that. And the world was watching. By dawn, the ballroom was only a memory, but the world had already claimed it. Screens lit up across continents. News anchors repeated the same story in different languages, their voices threaded together by the same headline flashing in bold. Black CEO humiliated at gala, then takes control of host's empire. David Cole's silence speaks louder than any speech. Legacy family falls, justice goes viral. Clips from Isabella's live stream replayed on every platform. The moment Nathan mocked, the moment Victoria sneered, the moment David revealed his truth. And finally, the moment the Whitmores were escorted out under the chandeliers, each second dissected, shared, remixed. Some added captions, "This is power." Others, "Never mistake calm for weakness." By breakfast, the video had surpassed 20 million views. By noon, it was the lead story in every major outlet. At a news desk in New York, an anchor declared, "This isn't just a business acquisition. It's a cultural reckoning. David Cole turned humiliation into history." In London, a financial analyst shook his head in disbelief. He planned this, every detail. He let them reveal themselves before revealing his power. That's not just business, that's strategy on a level rarely seen. In Lagos, a young entrepreneur tweeted, "For every time we've been told we don't belong, watch this. David Cole just showed us we always did." Politicians weighed in. Some praised his dignity. Others tried to spin it as market disruption. But the people didn't care about political spin. They cared about the image burned into their screens. A black man standing tall in silence while privilege crumbled around him. Stock markets reacted too. Whitmore Enterprises dropped sharply, headlines labeling it a legacy undone. Meanwhile, Cole Global surged. Investors scrambled to align themselves with the man who had turned a gala into a global boardroom. But for David Cole, the noise wasn't the point. He sat in his office, glass walls overlooking the skyline, his phone buzzing relentlessly with calls, requests, praise. He didn't rush to answer. He didn't need to. His presence in that ballroom had already said everything. On his desk lay the same name card Nathan had crumpled the night before. His assistant had gathered the pieces, placed them neatly in an envelope. Now it sat before him, a reminder of the night arrogance tried to erase him. He ran a finger across the torn edges, then set it aside. Justice wasn't in the headlines. It wasn't in the applause. It was in the silence after humiliation, in the stillness where dignity endured. That was where power lived. Across the internet, the quotes spread fastest. "You mocked the wrong man." Belonging isn't given. It's claimed. When justice speaks, the world listens. They appeared on posters, in speeches, in classrooms. His words weren't just remembered, they were repeated. And somewhere, the Whitmores watched the coverage. Their mansion curtains drawn, their empire crumbling, their legacy burned into feeds as a cautionary tale. For decades, they had been the hosts. Overnight, they had become the lesson. David Cole didn't smile as he scanned the morning headlines. He didn't need to. His silence had already outlived their noise. The world was still buzzing, still dissecting, still replaying, but he was already looking forward. Because for him, the storm wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Night returned, quiet and unassuming, as if the storm had never happened. But the world remembered. The echoes of the ballroom still lived in headlines, in whispers, in every glowing screen. David Cole stood by the glass wall of his office, the city glittering beneath him like a million chandeliers. The skyline stretched wide, alive with noise and light. But here, in this room, there was silence. The kind of silence he had carried his whole life. The kind of silence that had become his greatest weapon. On his desk, the torn name card sat in a frame, not restored, not reprinted, preserved exactly as it had been, wrinkled and broken, a reminder of what arrogance had tried to erase. a reminder of what dignity had made indestructible. He thought of the boy at 16, standing in a hotel lobby, told to leave because this area is for real guests. He thought of the man at 25, rejected from a job because he didn't fit the culture. And he thought of himself the night before, standing under chandeliers, mocked by a family who believed legacy could excuse cruelty. The boy had been silenced. The young man had been dismissed. But last night, the world had watched as David Cole rewrote the story. His phone buzzed again, another call from an anchor, another request for an interview. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The lesson wasn't in what he said on camera. The lesson was already carved into memory. Because true power didn't shout. True power didn't scramble for attention. True power stood silent while the world adjusted around it. The Whitmores had laughed, mocked, tried to strip him of belonging. But when the laughter ended, their empire ended with it, and his silence remained. He turned from the skyline, his reflection catching in the glass, calm, steady, unshaken. The reflection of a man who had carried scars and turned them into steel. Somewhere across the city, people were still replaying the clip. Students in dorm rooms, workers on late shifts, young dreamers who had been told they didn't belong. They watched him stand tall, unflinching, as arrogance crumbled around him. And in that image, they saw themselves. Not erased, not silenced, not denied. Belonging wasn't given, it was claimed. David Cole walked away from the window, the lights of the city still alive behind him. Tomorrow would bring more noise, more headlines, more demands. But tonight, there was only silence. The kind of silence that didn't ache anymore. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any voice. He sat, folded his hands, and let the quiet settle. This was his legacy. Not the empire he had acquired, not the wealth he had multiplied, but the truth he had proven, that dignity doesn't bow, that justice doesn't shout, and that when silence finally speaks, the world listens.